I'm here today with Leigh Stallard from Satago. Leigh's here to talk to you about how Satago can help solve your client cash flow woes. Say hello, Leigh.
Hello.
Let's get started. Welcome,
Hi,
Leigh.
everyone. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, really good, thank you. Not doing too bad at all.
Brilliant. Okay, well, people haven't come to see me talk, so I'm going to hand you over. So I'll give you a Zoom round of applause and welcome, Leigh.
Thank you very much. Hi, morning, everybody. Great to be here. Thank you for having me. Just give me a second while I share my screen, and we'll get started. So what we're looking at in this session is 7 ways that we can try and ease the burden a little bit for clients, especially around cash flow, and particularly around the cash that's coming into the business, because that's the thing that we feel is going to get stretched a little bit more as we move forwards. And clearly, as costs go up, well, we need money in the bank to be able to pay for that and cover it. So that's what we're covering. As Mark mentioned, my name is Leigh. I'm the head of accounting partnerships at Satago, and my background is in and around the accounting profession, and I've had just over 20 years in that space. I've worked in practice for 10, worked at Xero for just under 8 years, and then around in Soldo and now in Satago as well. So lots and lots of experience, and been fortunate to work with lots and lots of really forward-thinking firms and maybe pick up a few nuggets along the way. And so the context of the session that we're going to look at is, if clients have got maybe stretched cash flow at the moment, well, as we see things getting more difficult and as more negative news starts to roll in, it's only going to get harder, right? And so the idea is, what sort of things can we do to improve their lives a little bit, make it a bit easier? And in researching for the session, I started coming up across lots of papers and lots of documents. And so, for example, the FSB's Out in the Cold report that came out a little bit earlier in the month, that goes into the concerns that small businesses have around their energy prices. I found the PwC economic forecast, and I actually found the process quite depressing to read through. And so I'll gloss over all of the news and all the points. What I really wanted to do was underline the case that actually it's a bit tough and it's bad, but I think we can all take that as read rather than just go over and over the negative stuff. Of course, if anyone wants to see my workings, I'm more than happy to share the research and whatnot that I've found, but I think we can kind of take it at this point. But the purpose of the session isn't to dwell on negativity, and it isn't to kind of spread fear and uncertainty. It's to start to look at what can we actually do. Like, none of us can do anything about the Bank of England's interest rates. We can't do anything about any global affairs or anything like that. What we can do is start to focus in on what we can control. What can we have an impact on? What are the little things that we can start to do that can make life better for ourselves and for our clients? And so that's what the session is really about. And so we've got 7 areas that we'll cover fairly rapidly. Feel free to pop any questions in. But these are some of the things that we're seeing working both at Satago and sort of around the space as well. So the first thing that we can start to do is, when we think about where we focus and what we can control, the very first thing that we can control is where we spend our time and attention. And so the first area to look at is, well, how do we start to spot issues for clients? How can we take this big amorphous blob of negativity and start to say, well, actually, what are the things that I can do something about? How do I pinpoint specific issues within clients that I can actually then go and advise and help on? And so back in the early days of Xero, we used to tell this story about a New Zealand firm, fairly forward-thinking firm, that used to take Friday afternoons, they'd get beer and pizzas in, and they'd sit with a whole team and they'd look through a client's version of Xero and start to pick out things that could be better with that business. And then on Monday, they'd send them the insights that they found, and they did a bit of a team building exercise. That sounds great, and if you're in the position to do that, that's really, really good. But if you can't quite take the entire team offline for half a day, as most people probably would be in our cases, what you can do is try and carve out 10 minutes, a couple of minutes here, a couple of minutes there. Can we dip into the data? Can we just look at a report? And the idea that we've got to do everything for everybody, we can try and we're never going to achieve that. We can chunk it down. We can use some of the things that we learned from our audit studies and try and do sampling instead, to take a sample of clients, look at a sample of reports, and try and chunk it down to things that are a bit more manageable. So there's that. But since those early days of Xero, the world's moved on, and there are now new technologies and new tools that can actually sit atop your client base and start to extract that data out and give you top level insights. And there are tools that most people you'd be familiar with. So Sift, I think, is one, but two that have come out more recently: Hindsight and Reveal. Hindsight if you're in the Zero space, Reveal if you're in the Sage space, and they will just draw a load of data out and give you a dashboard with insights and tools that you can look at, and that will start to spot certain things or give you notifications as to what's going on. In Satago, how we do that is with a tool called the Portfolio Overview. And we'll go into risk insights and then portfolio overview just here. And what you'll see is a list of clients that if you're a partner, you've connected to your Satago account, and we're drawing out that debtor information from whether it's Sage, Xero, or kind of basically any accounting software. And we'll show you what's going on with your clients. So what's their average days overdue? What's the value of their ledger? What's overdue? And we'll break down the age debtors. This demo data is a little bit old, so apologies. Everything's in 90 days. But where we'll go a little bit beyond is to start to break down the risk segments based on the credit scores of your clients' customers, and then show you in here. So not only is stuff old, it's actually sat with high risk customers as well. And so this is the idea, like find yourself a few dashboards like this that can just sit at a high level, you can jump into, and you haven't got to do a ton of work to find out where the issues are with clients. You ideally want something that you can drill into to go and find out a little bit more information. And then let's say we're looking at this risk concentrations area. So what are the ages of the invoices that are due? What are the risks of the customers involved? And then we can just start to drill into stuff. And at the very least, we copy and paste this into an email, send this to a client and say, look, like, you're a bit exposed with your debtors. Here are the reasons why, and you could potentially charge a late fee. So really, really quick and simple way to get a little bit of advice out to a client, build the relationship with them and sort of bolster that. But actually that's taken a couple of minutes. And if you're a partner with Satago, it hasn't cost you anything more. The cost of being a partner is 50 quid a month. But once you're paying that, you can have as many clients attached to this dashboard as you want. So really great way to start to spot those insights. So next, once we've started to spot the things that are going on with our customers and with our clients, we can then start to build on that and start to reach out and offer more proactive stuff. So as I've mentioned there, going out to a client saying, look, did you know you've got this issue? Here's what you could do about it. That's one step, but it's time consuming. Like going out to those one-on-one is difficult. What we're starting to see lots of firms doing is building out content that can then sit it and pass great advice out on a one-to-many basis. So rather than having to have individual calls, you can put a piece of content out there and it can serve a lot of clients at once. And so the benefit of doing it that way is that you're not only reaching and supporting your clients through that process, you can also reach and reach new clients and potential prospects as well. And so it's a great way to build the profile of the firm. And I know there'll be people on the call, and actually drop it in the chat if you're trying to be active on LinkedIn but struggling to find content to post. That's a real challenge when people think, well, I've got to build my social media presence, got to do some marketing. Actually, what can I post? And the reality is that we often underestimate the value of the things that we think are fairly basic knowledge. But the reality is you've got loads and loads of experience, and some of those basic things that you might think of are actually really, really important to someone that's just starting a business. So something that may even seem as trivial as, how do you lay out an invoice? When is the best time to send it? How do you build a process such as in Xero or in Sage Business Cloud where you get a repeating invoice going out? Those two seem like fairly basic and fundamental things, and we'd almost kind of question ourselves, well, why would we put out a post or show someone how to do that? But if you don't know, it's really, really valuable. It's a great way to sort of build your presence online. And so there's some great examples of people doing that. And Pink Pig is a really, really good example of a firm. So here we've got a blog post from Ellie of the 7 deadly sins of credit control, but that's also supported by a quick video as well. And often when people are thinking about starting to create content to share insights with clients, they stop because they think it's expensive and time consuming. And as we can see with Ellie's video, it's really effective, and certainly recommend that you go and find it and have a listen to it. It's really, really cheap and simple to make because you're just there with your phone in a car while maybe you're waiting to pick the kids up or something, and you can just talk for a couple of minutes on a topic that you know something about, and then you've got a piece of content. But if you're nervous about speaking on camera, a tip or a tactic you can use is just record a few and don't necessarily worry about posting them anywhere. Just record them for yourselves. Don't go anywhere with it. And then you take that pressure off yourself, but it just gets you into the method of practicing, which is, what makes us good at anything. But the other thing about this, just without having like really polished videos and really high production value, it really humanizes you to your potential clients. And I think it might be lost on accountants and bookkeepers sometimes how intimidating it can be for a person to reach out to an accountant. Because you're highly trained, professional, people think they need to maybe put on their airs and graces sometimes to ask a question, or they don't want to ask a silly question. So putting out content like this can really humanize you and make you much more approachable to people that don't necessarily know you as well. But another little tactic here on creating content is, once you've recorded a video, if you put it somewhere like YouTube will automatically transcribe your voice and what you've said in that video. And so if you can download that transcription, you can then copy and paste that, and you've got 70% of a blog article ready to go. And so you can repurpose content really easily between different media so that you can then post it out in different ways. Another tactic you can use is, once you've got a blog post, so 7 deadly sins of credit control, for example, or you could take one at a time and then post those out separately as LinkedIn posts, for example. And so again, all this makes it really efficient to be able to get content out there to potential customers in a way that then means that it's digestible and sort of easy to use. The other area, aside from sort of social media and sort of digestible content like this and tips and advice and things like that, is that you can instead provide assets and resources as a free bit of content as well. So we're seeing some people offering email templates as a resource on their website that people can just download and then take away. And that's a really, really useful tactic for marketing, as well as helping clients and being useful. It's a really useful marketing tactic. So in his book, The Entrepreneur Revolution, Daniel Priestley talks about the idea of offering free products to start with, just to start to build trust and get that client or engaging with you. But then starting to offer like small bite-sized products called products for prospects. They're quite cheap things that people can buy quite easily and quite simply. And we'll look at that in a second. With the sort of assets and collateral and things like that, a way that you can really cut down on the time and the energy it takes to create them is go and speak to the app providers that you're working with. So we provide at Satago a group of email templates that you can download, and our kind of customers can take those. And what we're offering that is to firms to say, well, look, you have these, put them on your website, put a bit of branding around them, and then you can offer them out as an asset as well. So even creating content like this, you can do really quickly and really, really cheaply. And it's a great way to get the message out there, share some insights, and build some buzz around your brand. And so while creating content works on a kind of a one-to-many basis, it's very efficient, it's very scalable. If we want to start to narrow focus and do a little bit more for specific clients, and process reviews are a really, really good way to do that. Again, what we're capitalized on here is your expert knowledge of a certain area and just productizing that and making it quick and simple for a client. And so as part of our credit control as a service guide, which we'll pop a link to in a bit, one of the sort of services that you can start to build around that is a process review. And so again, there's no cost to creating this. It's just your time in sitting down and sitting with the client and saying, right, how do you do these things? This is what good looks like. You know, how we stacking up.
Sorry, just a real quick question.
Sure.
Guy asked, which I thought was quite poignant for the moment. Is
yeah.
Is there a particular message and time that it should be? Sorry, is a time and day, I think is what it meant to say, should be sent that is particularly effective. So you're changing stuff.
Is that on specific email reminders, chasing invoices, or is
I would have said that sounds like what it is, but you're talking about posts as well. So I'm just thinking it could be related to that as well.
So if it's about chasing invoices, it's going to vary a little bit, but I would avoid Mondays and Fridays, and make that the sort of middle of the week. You can customize those reminders and the times that you want them to go out. What you can also do, which is unique to Satago, is to break the reminders down into groups as well. And so you might find that you've got creative clients and there's a better time of the week to send things to those guys because maybe they don't work Fridays, you know. And so you can experiment a little bit. But as a general rule, I'd avoid, well, certainly weekends, but avoid Mondays and Fridays. And with timing on posting content, that's very much something to experiment with as you start to grow an audience. And different platforms will give you different feedback on how well your content performs at certain times of day. YouTube is really good at that. So once you've built a bit of an audience and you're posting regularly, there's actually an area inside the analytics that will tell you when your audience are online and when they're active. And so that can be really useful insight. LinkedIn doesn't do as great a job of that, but there are third-party apps, things like Shield, that you can use that will start to give you some of those insights and analytics back. So post on social media, it's going to vary a lot depending on your audience, but there are ways that you can start to learn more quickly what that looks like.
Excellent, thank you.
No worries. And so where we talked a second ago about Daniel Priestley's idea of you kind of have a free product that you offer to people, or something free that they can take, and then there's a simple purchase that they can make from you that's quite cheap, but it starts to build the process of maybe taking more from you. Process reviews are a really good thing to offer for that. So you could offer one for 49 quid, 100 quid, maybe it's a webinar where you go through what a great process looks like. And if you don't know, or if you don't have a resource already mapped out on what a great process for credit control looks like, well, we have that. Like we have that mapped out in our credit control as a service handbook. But really, if you want to automate this and take even less time with it, if you can initially take the time out to build out an ideal model, and also look at a set of questions to ask the client to understand where they are. So if you know what good looks like, and so the 6 areas that we look at in the handbook that we built with Will Farnell and Rowan von Trop are the 6 areas that you can see on screen. So what I recommend is start to build some questions around these areas so that you can interrogate what does the client or the prospect do, and how does that stack up against what you think best process is. And the reason I suggest doing it that way rather than just going through it one at a time is if you can systemize it and build it into a process, you can then offer that out to the team and delegate that to other people. And they just got to then follow the process rather than always relying on your expert knowledge. So you don't have to be involved in all these things all the time, but you can certainly productize it that way. So process reviews, really, really good way to offer more value to clients. Doesn't take a lot of time, certainly doesn't cost anything. And there are resources there that we can offer you to help you build that out. Next area is app advisory. And so it's a term that gets bandied about quite a bit, and it's spoken about quite a lot, and it means different things to different people. But the way I would look at app advisory is around, I think about it as a general practitioner. You know, when you go to the GP as a doctor, you kind of list out the symptoms, what's wrong, and then they'll recommend something. I'll go and do this, or refer you somewhere else. And some people prefer to treat app advisory that way. So they'll build out a set of tools, and then they will be almost the medicines that you'd prescribe, and it's a little bit more hands off. Others will go a little bit further. We'll kind of come to that in a minute. But another challenge that we see very often with firms as they're getting online and starting to build tools out is, well, how do you build an app stack? I know that sort of quote could be a little bit controversial itself at times. How do you pick which apps to use and what to recommend to clients? Because there are so many. What I recommend that you do is think about the challenges that you want to be known for solving, and then build out the toolkit that you use to give you coverage over those problems. So, for example, if you know that you want to help with cash flow, which hopefully you are, because that's why we're on the call, you'd go through and say, okay, what are the symptoms and what are the underlying causes of things like stretched cash flow? Is it late payments, and what's the root of that? It's probably poor controls. And then you'd make sure that you know very easily how to link those pain points that the client might have back to specific features within your toolkit. And that's why it's really important not to go overboard and add loads and loads and loads of apps in, because you need to be fairly prescriptive about saying, okay, you've got this problem in your business, Mr. or Mrs. Client, this feature within this app is what's going to help. And if you've got hundreds of them, it's going to be really difficult to do that. And so in this scenario, you'd say, well, look, like if we're struggling with these things, we've got 2 apps in there that we could use in conjunction to fix that. But that can be the end point. It's like, look, we've got this knowledge, we understand what these things do. Off you go. Here you go and solve the problem. Here's a link to sign up, or we'll set your subscription off, and off you go. So it still doesn't have to be massively time consuming, and it doesn't have to be expensive. But even kind of learning what features solve what problems, I'd even recommend don't spend the time trying to figure that out yourself. Go to the app provider and go, okay, well, look, you tell me what problems a client might have that you can fix and where they fix it. And then I can go and recommend. And your app provider should be happy enough to do that for you and give you a steer on that, to save you the time of having to do it. So that's one element of app advisory, right? That prescriptive, you've got a problem, here's a solution, off you go kind of thing. Perfectly fine, but quite quick and effective to do. The other thing where this, I think, a really, really big opportunity for firms at the moment is around creating educational and tutorial style content. So I heard a survey the other day, or results of a survey, that said the majority of audiences, probably like kind of younger audiences that are kind of really online, digital natives, like that, if they're looking for entertainment, they'll go to TikTok. If they're looking for educational content, they'll go to YouTube. And so there's this growing body of creators, I guess, developing in YouTube around that niche, that people are going there to learn things. And what's really, really interesting is that the opportunity is enormous. So on the screen, you'll see an example. I've searched for Satago on YouTube, and maybe somewhat embarrassingly, the top result isn't from us. It's not a video that we've produced. It's from Peter John, so PJCO accountants down in Brighton. That's the top video on there, and anyone that searches for this app is going to find that first. Now, admittedly, we're not pushing YouTube very hard. As you can see, we've only got a couple of videos on there. But if you look at a bigger app or something that has got, like YouTube obviously is used quite well by Xero, well, there's hundreds of thousands of views for videos on there, or tutorial videos on YouTube for how to use Xero. And so why that's of use to you is that often most of the app providers that you'll work with will have direct sales channels as well. They'll be selling directly into clients. And then you've got this scenario where you've got a customer that's picked up an app that now wants to know how to use it. And a video from you that pops up at the right time could be a great way to not only offer value out to the business community, of course, but also position you as an expert in that software space. And if there's a particular niche that you're trying to build, if you want to go after restaurants, then you look at Libio, you look at Deputy and things like that. And if you're there with tutorials for that, then you're going to seem to be an obvious choice if they're then looking for an advisor. So not only is it cheap, really, really cheap to make, you can just sit there with a copy of Loom, which you can actually get for free, record your screen and your face. If you want to record your face, you don't have to, and then just create a video, bang it on YouTube. And it's growing, but there's not a lot of content on there at the moment around apps. And so it's a great opportunity, particularly if you look for something that's not obvious, like Xero or QuickBooks. If you look at some of the apps in the ecosystem, you could definitely make an impact there. So again, another example, and I guess it goes back to the earlier point around content creation, but that's again something that you can do one to many. So you do it once, and then it reaches a lot of customers and keeps working for you over time. Like these videos, a couple of them posted a year or two ago, they're still working for those firms and those people, and they're still bringing potential leads in, and the lead numbers on that are insane. So we've got that, right? We've got that standalone kind of one-to-many option where we can go out and be seen as, app advisors or advisors in that space. The next step along from that is then to take that and say, well, look, we've either given you recommendations in the process review, or we've given you recommendations for an app to go and use to solve this problem. And, off you go is the first method. The next then is actually getting involved in the implementation and saying, well, okay, great. Like, here's what we recommend you do. Let us roll our sleeves up and get involved and implement it for you. And again, it can be quite time consuming to start that from scratch and say, okay, how do I implement Satago, for example? Where do I even begin? So the way to save the time on that is go and work with the app provider and say, look, we want to be able to implement this stuff. We want to be able to do it. What assets can you give us? What workflow can you show us? How can you train us on how to set a client up so that you've got that process then nice and simply contained so that you can then repeat it really, really efficiently? But again, you haven't got to spend a lot of money for that, right? App providers want to grow and they want to support you in growing. And so they should be happy to help you with that sort of stuff for no charge. And so that can add a really nice revenue line item on your suite of services, as well as being a draw for new clients. So you take the flow through, you're targeting hospitality clients, you've got a Deputy or a Libio kind of tutorial video out there, someone finds you through that, they then come to you, you've got something to offer them in terms of implementation to make sure they're set up correctly. So there's a really nice flow and a process that can start to generate fees for your practice. And a really good execution of this that we've seen fairly recently. So the team from Pink Pig came on board as a Satago partner in the last couple of months. I've already started to pull all of these things together onto a credit control page, and they've done it beautifully and executed it really, really well. And so there's an implementation option on there where clients can just come and pay a one-off fee to have Satago implemented and have their processes reviewed, but also an individual separate credit control review as well. And you'll also notice on the bottom of that page there's the option to download those free assets, which kind of covers a whole range of bases just there. that's implementation. I could talk about that all day because it's such a big topic, but there's a few tips in there, right? Lean on your app providers for support. Get a guide from them on, what a reasonable fee looks like for these things. And if you can back that with content as well, you've got a nice flow of leads coming through. But I guess okay, great, we can grow fees from it, and that's interesting, and it's good for you guys. But I think what's really useful is that we're adding value at every step of the journey here, right? We're putting value out into the small business community, and that's ultimately going to help everybody, but in a way that doesn't necessarily cost you much. So anyway, implementation, some great things on there. More than happy to pick that up and talk separately after the session about that if that's useful. The penultimate point is connect to funders. And so there's, we're seeing a really interesting time at the moment where, it's always been difficult for small businesses to access funding, particularly since the 2008 stuff. And these headlines are from, as you can see on the screen, back from the summertime. This is from a talk we did at the Digital Accountancy Show, and it hasn't got better since then. It's become more and more difficult to access funding for small businesses. And usually there'll be, if you're a layperson or a small business owner and, you're not financially trained, you don't know these ecosystems and these spaces, you'll just assume, we'll go to the bank and we'll go and speak to Lloyds for a loan or whatever it might be. But there's been a real explosion, as you guys will presumably know, in the sort of fintech options that are available to businesses. And so where we can add some value, certainly in Satago's perspective, is around invoice financing, which often is sort of sidelined in favor of more traditional products like loans and overdraft, but it's really, really effective way to fund a business. And once you've got someone set up on Satago, if you come to finance and then eligible invoices, the client can then immediately see, I just need to borrow this much money. I can pick these invoices, which we've served up as being available to be borrowed against. And then it's a simple case of hitting continue. Once they've obviously already set up the account ahead of time, they can just pick and say, look, I need to borrow against these things, hit continue, and they can have up to 90% of that invoice value in their bank within a day or two. So it's very, very rapid. And there's some great use cases for this. So let's say, we fast forward a little bit to say February, March, and you're sitting down with the client and saying, well, look, the sort of accelerated or the advanced capital allowances, I forget exactly the name for it. I'm sure someone can pop that in the chat and remind me. But the capital allowances where you can get, kind of 130%, I think it is, of capital allowances. And I think that ends in March. And so if you're sat down with them in Feb, March, and say, well, look, actually, it's a good time to go and buy some assets, but they just don't have the cash flow for it there. Invoice finance is a great flexible way to just get a bit of cash in so they can go and kind of capitalize from that tax advantage. But a lot of the sort of negative downsides that people see around funding, we sort of try and dispel with Satago. So we're really transparent with the cost. You can see here, this is what the daily cost is going to be. We show the cheapest borrowing at the top. And we don't have to fund everything as well, which is typically the case with invoice factoring. You can just fund one invoice and then never use it again if you want to. And so it's worth, just like we mentioned earlier on, having that toolkit around apps. It's worth just having a working knowledge of how this works. And so if you've got a client that needs to accelerate a bit of working capital, it's an option there that they can grow that. But also in that kind of topic of growth, we've seen a huge move towards corporate finance now. It typically was a preserve of really large firms and maybe the upper mid tier, but we start to see that come down into smaller firms as well, where they're trying to look at how can we create a kind of a corporate finance offering, because there's money to be made there. If we look at rewards and then commissions, at Satago we offer a 20% commission for any referrals through to invoice finance. And the reason for that is that we want to lend responsibly and sustainably. We don't want people just finding their way in here and just accidentally borrowing stuff. They couldn't do that, but we want them to be working with you through that process and being guided properly and lending responsibly. And so that kind of commission is there. If you want to just give that back to the client, you can do, it's no problem. But that's there as an option for you.
Leigh, sorry, I think we've got a reasonably relevant question at this point, which you might come on to, but Howard asked, can we finance international debtors to UK clients?
Great question. So it's just UK companies at the moment.
Brilliant, thank you.
But that's something we're always looking at taking on that feedback. If there's a specific use case that you've got in mind, I'd love to explore that and know, what are you thinking, what do you need, and then we can take that away as a feedback and see if that's something we can look at developing. But anyway, so access to funding, real challenge, particularly when cash flow gets stretched. There's a quick and easy way to do that with Satago, with other funders as well. But that's how we do it here. and also can make some money for you as well if you want that. Some firms do. Increasingly, obviously, you always used to be the way that firms never ever wanted to touch that, and that's fine. But increasingly, more and more are interested in having that revenue come into the practice. So it's there as an option for you. Final point is around credit control as a service, and this is where we just sort of bring together everything that we've looked at so far and build out a really comprehensive, full-blown outsourced credit control. And the reason this is growing really quickly, you can see a bunch of examples on here of firms that are starting to offer this, is that it's a really nice bolt-on top of existing bookkeeping work. So if you're already in that client's data every week or every month, starting to find things that you can add on top of that as extra bolt-ons are really, really useful. And it's a really painful area for small businesses to tend to try and deal with as well, particularly if they're very small and it's an owner-managed business and they're having to go and sell and build the relationships and network to get that work in the first place. They're having to deliver the work. There's not really often a lot of appetite to then go and kind of go and chase that money afterwards as well. And so being able to offload that to an advisor, someone that can support them with it, is really, really helpful. And in reality, what happens is it's fairly automated. So if we come into Satago, we can go to credit control and then settings. And you can see, as I mentioned earlier on, we can build out different groups that we want to try and create different templates for. So let's say, for example, we'd have some people that are on direct debit. So we remove those, put them in a group so we don't chase them. Where we want to chase people, we can then start to customize the reminders in here. And we talked earlier about implementation. It's a great example of adding value by helping that customer or that client, to customize the way that these templates go out and make it work for them and break down the clients in different groups. Like, as much as you want to automate credit control, there's always everyone has one or two customers that they don't want to chase, or that they're a special case and we need to move them to one side. And so building out the capabilities to deal with that is really valuable to the client and can justify some of the fees that we've seen there on that implementation service. But all of this is sort of automated. We set this up and it's sort of set and forget. We can look at the outbox and see what's due to go out, so we can be kind of proactively looking at what we're sending out in terms of statements or reminders to that client's customers. And as a sort of pricing option, what we've seen you kind of recommended for some firms to do is to, if you're going to price based on the number of clients that you're going to chase, let's say, for example, a fee of $199 a month, and you'll chase 10 clients for them. Well, you can incorporate those 10 clients into one of these groups and set the reminders up and kind of chase it from there. And again, your role is to just come in and give oversight, just make sure the reminders are going out, make sure things are reconciled, and a lot of the automation is done for you. Now, in practice, what happens is, you get to the point where people have taken a long time to pay, and it's kind of clear that they're not going to do that. With Satago, we find that 70% of invoices are paid within one reminder, and about 84% are paid after two reminders. But there's always going to be that hardcore that go to that extent of not paying and need to be taken to court or whatnot. Usually firms don't want to get involved with that, so they'll refer that to a kind of a partner or a third-party debt collection agency. But if that's of interest, we can kind of show you how we see that being built out. But a lot of the points that we've looked at are contained in our credit control as a service guide. And so all of these areas we go through in the guide, and it gives you a bit more detail about how to build these services out and how to start to offer them to clients. And if you want to find that, you can check out the handbook yourself by scanning the QR code on the screen or going to satago.com/TAM, where you'll be able to download that guide and have a look at that in a bit more detail. Similarly, if there's anyone that thinks Satago is worth a look, there's an offer for you as well. If that's of interest, then drop a note in the chat and I'll kind of share what that offer is. But I don't want to be, I know I've been in Satago a few times, I don't want to be kind of overly selling too much. But those are the main 7 points, right? So the idea of finding a process, finding a way to spot issues for clients proactively, and then decide what you do with them is really important. You can't be in every client all the time. It's just not practical. So having a system or a process of that is really, really important. Creating content and putting it out there to serve multiple groups of clients at once is a really, really helpful way to add value and also build relationships with business communities. Going from there, looking at process reviews, showing people what good looks like, and then comparing their processes to a good proven model is a great way to start to build value, offer insights, and start to get clients to build their relationship with you and offer more revenue opportunities. Looking at app advisory and kind of thinking more strategically about that is a really good way to again build out what you can offer to clients at the same time as adding value. Then looking at implementation, how do you really get under the nuts and bolts of what's going on, help clients get set up for success. Again, the really real input of that is your time, which I know is kind of a premium, but it doesn't really cost you anything to do that, and we can provide some of the frameworks to help you with implementation. Then we can look at connecting to funders and finding ways to get cash and capital to your clients so they can do what they need to do. And then finally looking at credit control as a service as a way to typify everything else and add new revenue lines to the practice whilst really helping the clients out of a bit of a scrape. So those are the 7 points. I hope they've been useful. I hope that at least 1 or 2 of them will be new to you, and there's something that you can go away from with those. But more than happy to go through any questions and answer anything that I can.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Leigh. I didn't realise you were coming towards the end there, so I'll just come on to Howard's asked a second question based on his first one, and it was, do you fund all sectors? I have a client in the agency sector that seems to find trouble.
So we don't discount any sectors. The general thing to think about, or the thing that sort of disqualifies the majority of things, if they're going to be disqualified, is when it's an incomplete job, or it's people are billing in advance, because we can't lend against an invoice if that client hasn't completed the work. So in construction, for example, that comes up often where you'll send out applications for payments and you've got surveyors looking at things. We can't fund an invoice and then find someone else comes in and says, actually, this work hasn't been done. So that creates a bit of a sticky area. Beyond that, like let's have a chat and see what we go through. I think with agencies, there shouldn't be any major issues there. So I'd be interested to know what they're doing and see why it is that they're struggling.
Excellent, thank you. So we can move on to the questions. So if anybody does have any other questions for Leigh, please put it in the Q&A for us. So Emily asked, what's the best way to forecast cash flow when financing on the whole book?
Yeah, cheers, Emily. So when you're working on the whole book, what that means is that all of the invoices that you send out are then funded. So you're getting advance payments from us on every invoice that goes out the door. So in theory, that's fairly straightforward to forecast. What happens sometimes, though, is that and this happens with all invoice financing, is that if there are, so for example, some customers in there that kind of fall foul of that stuff that we mentioned a minute ago, where there's like contingent liability and all that sort of stuff in there, or the job's not completely done, we then have to remove that and take that out of what we can fund against. Other areas are where, if you're highly exposed to one customer, so you've maybe got 2 really large customers and then, like, say 5 or 6 other ones, but most of your invoices go to those 2, it becomes a lot more difficult to fund those as well. And so where you've then got those restrictions and stuff, that can become a little bit more difficult to forecast. So it does come to kind of looking forward, knowing what they're going to bill, and then working with your provider like us to know, okay, what are the restrictions going to be? Emily, I know we've kind of spoken about that before. If that's still coming up as an issue, then let's grab another call on that and see what we can sort out.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Leigh. That's really useful for any of the members that have got sort of questions that perhaps come up afterwards as well. Then obviously they can get in touch.
Of course.
Richard asked, and it's an interesting question because I have a little bit of a story behind this one. But Richard asked, and I think it's a very similar thing: can accountants use it for their ledgers?
Yeah.
Now, interestingly enough, one of the conversations I had, we was at one of our mastermind groups, and we were talking about debt problems that the accountant had.
Yeah. And
I think they'd spoken to someone at your place after the conversation, because I said to them, as well as it being a great offering for their customers, it's also an opportunity for them to use it so that they can also show its proof of concept, if you like. But yeah, sorry, I'll let you explain. But
that's fine. No, you covered most of that really, really well. So often accountants and bookkeepers want to, the term is eat your own dog food, right? So you want to try the stuff that you're recommending. And so, yeah, absolutely, there's a version there that you can use for your practice. It's built as small business software. So, if you're mid-tier to large tier firm, if you want to segregate portfolios to reporting lines, we don't necessarily do that well at this point. But if you're a kind of a small to low medium firm, yeah, absolutely. The tool's there for anyone, but it will be really, really suitable for those firms. And it is an interesting point that even though more and more firms are moving to monthly fixed fees and it's covered by direct debit, go cardless and stuff like that, it is a really, really difficult area. When I was back in practice, I used to do the credit control. And it's really, really challenging, especially, we were talking before, weren't we, about the clients who don't see it's their problem to get their records in on time, right? It's the accountant's problem. I'll get it in sometime in January, but then, it's off to you, I don't care. So when you've got those clients that are really sort of standoffish and they don't really engage that much, well, you do a tax return bill for them. They don't really care about paying for that until they've got to come around to the next January, because what are you going to do? Put them on stop? Like, no, it doesn't matter, because they don't need you again for a year. So it becomes really, really challenging. And so, yeah, absolutely, accountants and bookkeepers can use it for their own ledgers and their own debt chasing. It's really effective for that.
Brilliant, thank you. Shubham has asked, the factors affecting cash flows which we can control as and when occurred, and not as per analysis of end of period accounts as past. I'm not sure that's a question. So, is there something in there?
So feel free to clarify, right? Drop it in the chat and clarify if I'm answering the wrong question. But it sounds to me as though we're looking at, well, how do we do this proactively versus you've done your end of year accounts and you're looking back and saying, actually, you had a cash flow problem there, because obviously they already know by that point, right? And so I think a lot of that comes down to getting the right processes to spot those issues proactively at the beginning. So we talked about the dashboards, whether it's Satago, whether it's any of the other tools that we mentioned, getting those things in place. They're all really kind of low cost options, and so they really pay for themselves quite well in terms of finding that stuff before it becomes a major problem. The other element is around bookkeeping. And so when I was like 2012 or so, when I first started at Xero, we often spoke to accountants about doing more bookkeeping, because you've got the tool, you've got bank fees, you've got bulk reconciliation and stuff like that. Why wouldn't you try some bookkeeping? And the attitude almost exclusive is like, well, we can't charge enough for it. It doesn't make sense. And I've noticed anecdotally like a real change in that over the last few years, and more firms are willing to get into that and do it, because they know that, well, maybe they can't charge as much for the bookkeeping, but then the year-end accounts are much better. Or it opens the door for offering much more advisory stuff. Like, I know that's a bit of an eye roller as a term, but once you're in and involved with that client more often, well, you can find things to help them with. You can have more conversations, and so it becomes really, really useful. And so I'd say if it's about proactively spotting cash flow issues, it'd be those two things. Find some analytical tools that can pull out insights on a regular basis, and then secondly, make sure their bookkeeping is a good standard, and so it's relevant, right? Obviously your bookkeeping 6 months out of whack, then you're not going to know anything. But that in itself becomes an opportunity to say, well, if Mr. or Mrs. Client, your bookkeeping is up to date, we'd be able to tell you these things. Why don't you give us a bookkeeper? And then there's tons more value in it, actually, like get you paid quicker, extra 20 grand in the bank, it's worth paying for the bookkeeping at that point. So it adds to that value proposition for doing the bookkeeping, if that's an area you want to go down.
Also stops the accountants chasing them so often for information, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the chasing's always there, right? Because you still need the records from them, but presumably they're going to pay you every month. Yes. They're going to make sure that they're giving you what you need, right? Because you're still going to charge them. But yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Tanya's asked your best tips on how to get clients in a flat spin to listen to the advice you give them.
Okay.
So my theory is that there needs to be more trust in the relationship to get for the advice to be there. But what's your take on it?
So it's a perennial problem, right? How do you get clients to listen? I think so. There's two things I would suggest looking at. First is questioning techniques. So in the credit control as a service handbook, there's an area on what's called spin selling. So it's more to do with sales, but like good question techniques is useful in lots of realms. And so if you're presented with a client that's saying like my cash flow's tight, I can't pay for things, right? Well, why is that? What's causing that, or what's the impact of that? And then asking those follow-on questions to really dig down on what's the underlying issue that's going on, but also what is the actual impact on that person in the end? Because we've all got stuff, like chores that we know we should do, but we haven't done them. Like I don't know if I should admit this or not. I drove around for like 6 months with one of my headlights out. I knew I should fix it, and like if the other one went out, I was going to be in a bit of a dicey problem on a country lane. But I just didn't, and it's just because the ingredients for motivation weren't there. So the first thing is to try and drill down on that and understand like why are they in a spin, and how is that affecting other areas of their life, and so you can start to then build out a stronger case of why they should do what you're recommending. Right? How will it ultimately affect those other areas? The other element that's useful to think about is that, I mean, during my time of like apps and talking about all this stuff, one of the key things is implementation, right? And getting people to actually use this stuff. Yeah. And so I spent quite a lot of time learning about change management, how you bring people around and how you kind of lead that sort of change. And it's a massive topic, far too much for us to go into today, but there's a formula I'll leave you with that will be quite useful. So it's called the Beckard and Harris change formula, and it says that people will change when certain ingredients are present, right? So the first is that you need a compelling reason to change from what you're doing at the moment. So if you're not feeling the pain of what's happening now, you're never going to change, right? So you can sell someone the dream, but if they don't need to change if they're comfortable as they are, they'll never change, right? So that's the first thing. You need to got a burning platform, it's called. So there's that element. You then need a kind of something to aspire to, or they need to buy into the end goal. So okay, I'm on a burning building, but I need somewhere appealing to go to before I'll change. So if they're on that flat spin, that question that I mentioned first is understanding, okay, what's the impact of carrying on as we are. Then you've got to understand what does success look like and where can they get to. So what is the area they want to move towards, right? So where we are now, where we could be. Then you need a credible plan to get there. If I don't know, I'm going to have a heart attack if I don't lose £50, right? I know that, so that's a burning platform. I know that I can go to the gym, so I can see that if I lose £50, I won't have a heart attack. So that's the future that I want to get to. If I don't know how to do it, or I don't know how to go to the gym or work out, I'm never going to do it because I don't know what steps to take to get there. So you need that. The third ingredient is then the compelling plan. So you need to be able to document to the client. Go, well, if we do A, B, and C, you're pretty much guaranteed to get to that final point. So that's the element. And then the fourth bit of that is then what is the personal cost of all of that? All of that first stuff has to outweigh the personal cost of doing that process. So if you can give someone a perfect plan to get out of that tailspin and get them to where they want to be, and there's a brilliant plan there, but it's going to cost them £5 million, well, they still won't do it. So it's got to balance up. Yeah. So if I've probably explained that and butchered it terribly, but if you Google search the Beckard and Harris change formula, that might give you some elements to bring into those conversations with that client and help them move forwards.
That's brilliant, because one of the things that we talk about or one of the processes we have in our mastermind groups is the problem analysis. So instead of solving the problem, which we're all very good at firing solutions at people, and it essentially at its most basic is asking two questions: what problem sits beneath that, and what problems does it cause? And the idea is that you come to the pain, and then in order to solve it, is pretty much what you've said, is finding the pleasure.
Yeah.
And that works in everything, marketing as well as selling the dream, as it were. So
which that old adage, isn't it, that we sort of decide things emotionally and then justify it logically. Yes. And so when you're solving problems, it's always logic, right? And not to stereotype, but accountants bookkeepers really good at doing that. Like, logically, here's how we do it. But that's not enough to motivate someone. They have to buy into it emotionally. So it's what are the personal stakes for me to do what you're telling me to do. So
yeah, absolutely. No, brilliant. Thank you. I like that. I'm going to have a look at that. There is another question which I'm not going to ask in full. Okay. But ultimately, Andy has asked about what software to use for debt control. So I'm going to answer that for you, and that must be Satago. Because the question was about another piece of software. So I'm guessing that Andy perhaps wasn't aware of who or what Satago is. So hopefully after today, that will resolve that question for Andy and everybody else who is unsure as to what software to use to utilise to do debt control.
Yeah, that's very kind. I'd agree. And look, in reality, like, I have used Satago myself on little side businesses and stuff like that, and so I'm not recommending anything I wouldn't use myself.
No, that's brilliant. Excellent. Well, that is all our questions, unless anybody else has anything else. I've just noticed a few people have had to go. Someone's apologised because HMRC are calling, so apparently you sit behind HMRC in the order of priority for today, but
well, you've got to take those calls, right? I saw someone the other day had a letter that was it was like 18 months overdue or something like that. It was ridiculous. So yeah, if HMRC call, you've got to take that. I understand that completely.
But we'll make sure we get the recording out. So Emily has said thank you. But yeah, great. So there are no more questions. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much to everyone for joining us. Thank you, Leigh. That was really good session. I really enjoyed that. And hopefully it gives everybody a bit more of an insight into managing their clients' cash flow woes. I had trouble with it before and I've still got problems with it. But so thank you very much. We'll pop the link, or Michelle's just popped the link back in. So if you want to get in touch with Satago, then the link is there, and they'll be in touch. And thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Cheers. Thanks, Leigh.
Bye.
Thank you for watching our webinar with Leigh Stallard from Satago, where he talked about the cash flow woes for your clients and how Satago can help solve those issues. I thought there was some great content from Leigh about generic stuff about the cash flow problems that your customers face and how to help ensure that they improve them. If you'd like more, please comment below and we can ask Leigh any further questions you may have. But alternatively, like the video and subscribe to our channel to get more interviews, webinars and software reviews in the accountancy industry. Below here now, you should be seeing some videos of what we recommend you watch next for our channel to help inspire, challenge and support you to grow the practice you want to have. Thanks for watching.